My name is Jessica Lynn Avery, and when my parents gave my younger sister a $300,000 apartment and told me, "You'll figure it out," I didn't scream or cry. Not then. I just smiled, nodded, and 6 years later, I invited them to dinner at my farm-to-table restaurant built from scratch, where I served my mother Emily's eviction notice with the dessert. Her jaw locked around a forkful of lemon tart while I calmly said, "Funny how the one you bet against is the one who now owns your building." Before I tell you how I got there, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And tell me this, have you ever been told, "You're strong, you'll figure it out," when what you really needed was support? Now let me take you back to the moment that broke me, right there in my own living room, with people I once thought would never hurt me. It happened on a blistering July afternoon. The central AC hummed steadily in the background of our Sacramento home, masking the real chill in the air, my mother's voice. She sat on the cream sectional with a glass of white wine, casually flipping through a Pottery Barn catalog like this was just another Sunday. Across from her, my father, David Avery, CPA and king of careful budgeting, was folding his reading glasses like he was about to present quarterly earnings. And in the middle of them, my younger sister Emily, 3 years my junior and wearing the same smug smile she'd been perfecting since the age of 10, scrolled on her phone. I had just brought in a stack of college brochures. UCLA, UC Davis, but mostly UC Berkeley, the dream I'd been building since I was 14. I thought we were sitting down to talk about FAFSA forms and dorm essentials. Instead, I got a life sentence. "We've made a decision," my dad said first, which was already a red flag. I glanced at my mom. She was sipping her wine and not meeting my eyes. Dad continued, "We've purchased a condo for Emily, in East Sac. She moves in next month." The air went out of the room like someone had cracked a window in the middle of a fire. "What?" I asked, blinking. "You bought her a condo." My voice cracked on the last word. I turned to Emily, who didn't even look up. My mother set her wine down with a soft clink and finally spoke. "It was a good investment, Jess. Real estate is solid, and Emily needs a stable place now that she's starting at FIDM. The timing made sense." I sat down, hard into the armchair. "What about my college fund?" There was a pause, just long enough to answer my question without words. "We had to use it," my dad said gently. "You know how expensive property is. But Emily's going to need help getting established." I couldn't breathe. "But Berkeley," I choked out. "I already got in, we talked about this. You promised." My mom reached over and patted my knee like I was a preschooler upset about snack time. "Jess, you're strong. You've always been the independent one. You'll figure it out." And that was it. That was my inheritance. A pat on the knee and a sentence that would echo in my skull for years. I sat frozen, watching Emily finally look up with a shrug that said, "Not my problem," and my parents turning their attention to the catalog again like we were done here. I nodded slowly, something inside me fracturing. That night I lay in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling fan as it spun. Spun like my thoughts, spun like the years I'd spent doing everything right. Honor roll, volunteering, part-time job. I'd done all the things they told me would make me worthy. And none of it mattered. I pressed my face into my pillow to muffle the sobs. Heartbreak, humiliation, and pure molten rage twisting in my chest like a storm. I cried until I ran out of tears, and then I stared at the ceiling again. And somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, I made a decision. They gave me nothing. So I'd build everything. And one day, they'd see. The morning sun cast a warm orange glow over Sacramento, but it didn't reach me. I packed in silence. Every zip of a duffel bag, every folded hoodie, every glance around my childhood room felt like carving away pieces of myself. My acceptance letter to UC Berkeley, creased now, but still pinned above my desk, stared back like a promise broken by someone else's greed. I left it there. There was no dramatic farewell, no confrontation, just a note. Handwritten. Folded in half and left on the kitchen counter between the fruit bowl and the half-finished crossword my dad always worked on after dinner. "I'm going to figure it out. But I'm doing it my way now. Don't look for me." Jessica, I slipped out the door before the coffee pot even sputtered. By noon, I was in Modesto, 70 miles away and light years from everything I'd known. The air smelled like fresh dough and car exhaust. A flyer on a bulletin board outside a bakery caught my eye. Room for rent above shop. Private entrance. $450 month. I didn't hesitate. The room was barely the size of my old walk-in closet. The walls slanted from the old roofline, and the windows overlooked the alleyway behind the bakery. The bed creaked when I sat on it, and the shared bathroom down the hall smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls and mildew. But it was mine. I sat cross-legged on that sagging mattress, pulled out my battered notebook, and wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page. They gave me nothing, I'll make everything. I whispered it aloud like a prayer, or maybe a battle cry. Modesto Community Library became my second home. I didn't have the money for prep courses or tutors, but I had time and I had will. I spent 10 hours a day under flickering lights, poring over biology textbooks, timed practice exams, and flashcards scribbled with terms like mitochondrial respiration and epithelial tissue. I was chasing more than a test score. I was chasing the life they told me I didn't deserve. It was on one of those long days, when my eyes were dry from scanning diagrams of cellular division and my brain ached with effort, that I heard someone's voice. "You always study this hard." I looked up startled. A guy stood beside my table, tall, light brown curls tucked under a beanie, and kind eyes behind black-rimmed glasses. He wore a faded hoodie with a small tear at the sleeve and held a stack of books that leaned dangerously to the left. "Sorry," he added quickly. "Didn't mean to interrupt. You just looked like you might be trying to summon mitochondria with sheer willpower." I blinked, unsure whether to be annoyed or laugh. "I'm Jessica," I said cautiously, smoothing my notes. "Alex," he replied, offering a small wave. "Pre-med, or maybe science fiction writer, depends how much debt I'm in by next year." I smirked before I could stop myself. "I'm not even in yet," I said. "Studying for the entrance exams, hoping for UC again next year." Alex tilted his head. "Biology? Yeah, plants mostly." "Photosynthesis is your thing?" he asked with a teasing grin. "That's oddly wholesome." I surprised myself with a laugh, a real one. The first in weeks. "Well, someone's gotta study the things that keep us breathing." He nodded thoughtfully, then placed his own books on the table and gestured toward the empty seat across from me. "Mind if I camp out here? I promise I'll be quiet. I'm more productive when I'm near someone who looks like they'll punch me if I check Instagram." I shrugged. "Sure, just no talking about mitochondria like it's a joke. I take my organelles seriously." He mimed, zipping his lips. We worked in silence after that, but every so often I'd catch him glancing up with a crooked smile as if silently rooting for me. The library lights buzzed overhead, and outside the sky darkened into early evening. My stomach growled, loud enough for him to hear. "I've got an emergency granola bar," he offered, pulling one from his backpack. "I'm not taking your snack," I said, shaking my head. "Why not? I'm not even hungry. I'm just here to sabotage your glucose levels so I can beat you on the bio exam." I rolled my eyes but took the bar. Peanut butter. The good kind. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible or disposable. That night, as I climbed the narrow stairs back to my tiny room above the bakery, I kept thinking about Alex, his easy confidence, his genuine kindness, and how he didn't look at me like I was someone who had failed simply because her family gave up on her. I curled into bed, textbook still open on my lap, and whispered one more time into the dark. "They gave me nothing. But I think I'm starting to find something." Modesto Library was never crowded, just quiet in that comforting, old book dust in the sunbeam kind of way. There was no formal schedule, no plan, but somehow Alex and I always ended up at the same corner table near the west window, the one that overlooked the oak trees lining the sidewalk. He'd arrive with a backpack full of dog-eared books, a coffee that smelled like cinnamon, and some sort of sarcastic comment about the failing HVAC system or the fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like undercooked poultry. And I'd be there already, my notes spread out like armor, highlighters uncapped and ready for battle. "You again?" he'd ask. And every time I'd smirk and say, "It's a public library, don't act surprised." It became a rhythm, a quiet companionship. He'd quiz me on photosynthesis or ask my opinion on a passage from Siddhartha. I'd counter with questions about his pre-med essays or help him remember the difference between meiosis and mitosis, which he always mixed up despite my best analogies. "You're like a walking science mnemonic," he teased once. "It's terrifying." We sat in silence a lot too. Comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't press on your skin. I liked that about him. He didn't fill the air with unnecessary noise. He noticed things, the way I scribbled faster when I was stressed, or how I sometimes stared too long at my open notebook without writing a word. One afternoon, we both reached for the same copy of The Botany of Desire in the science section. "Oh no," he said with mock horror. "You caught me cheating on you with Michael Pollan." I rolled my eyes. "You've got two other plant books in your bag. Those are just casual flings. This one's a soulmate." I laughed and handed it to him. "Take it. I've read it twice." He looked at me then, with that same thoughtful expression he wore when I got a question right without even blinking. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "What plants?" I asked. "No, this, the life you're trying to build, the one they didn't hand you." That made me pause. We found our way back to the table. He pulled out his laptop, I opened my notes. We didn't speak for a while, not until he slid his essay draft toward me. "I'm stuck. Want to trade outlines?" I passed him mine, nervous. My writing felt personal in a way my voice didn't. A few minutes later, he leaned back, eyebrows raised. "You've got more fire than anyone I know." The words hit something deep, like he'd opened a window I'd forgotten was there. "You mean I'm aggressive?" I muttered, embarrassed. "No," he said seriously. "I mean you care so hard it burns through the page. This part, where you explain how roots anchor even in cracked concrete, that's not just science, Jess, that's you." My throat tightened unexpectedly. I looked away, blinking too fast. "It's just an entrance essay." "No," he said gently, "it's a manifesto." That night I lay awake in my tiny room, that sentence echoing in my head. More fire than anyone I know. No one had ever called me fire before. My parents always said I was intense, the kind of word that made you feel like a warning label. Emily was the charming one, the delicate one, the one you helped. I was the one who figured it out. But Alex didn't seem scared off by the parts of me that burned. He sat across from them, invited them to speak. Eventually, the library became less about studying and more about showing up, for each other. He'd ask how my night shifts were going at the bakery below my room. I'd ask about his older brother, who was pressuring him to go into sports medicine. "I want to study plant-based therapies," he told me once. "But don't tell my brother. He thinks I'm trying to save the NFL." I grinned. "Well, technically plants do reduce inflammation, so maybe you are." And slowly I began to feel it, the shift. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore, I was reaching. There was one evening the lights flickered in the library, a summer thunderstorm rolling in outside. The smell of ozone and wet pavement drifted through the open windows. I looked up from my notes and caught him watching me again. "What?" I asked, tucking hair behind my ear. He didn't smile this time. "Just said, I hope you don't give up, Jess. You've already come too far." That night, I didn't cry into my pillow. I didn't fall asleep angry or empty. Instead, I stayed up writing the final paragraph of my essay, the one where I compared a girl left behind to a seed that chose its own soil. And this time, I meant every word. Test day came faster than I expected. The early mornings, the late-night flashcard marathons, the library lunches over wilted salad, all of it blurred into one long stretch of quiet, determined effort. I'd grown used to seeing Alex across the table, chewing the cap of his pen, bouncing his knee when he was stuck on a concept, humming low when he finally cracked it. But that morning, as we both sat side by side in the hallway outside our testing rooms, he wasn't humming. "I hate standardized tests," he said, staring at the ceiling like it owed him an apology. "I feel like they measure how good you are at breathing under pressure, not how much you actually know." I pulled my hoodie tighter around me. "Yeah, but breathing under pressure seems to be my entire life lately." He smiled faintly and touched my wrist, just briefly. "Good luck in there, plant girl." "You too, science fiction med guy." The test was brutal. The kind of brutal that leaves your palms sweating halfway through and your confidence slowly unraveling like a loose thread you can't stop pulling. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Afterward, we didn't say much, just walked to the bus stop together under a gray sky. I was too drained to analyze every question I might have gotten wrong. "You're still on track," Alex said as we parted ways. "Don't let a test shake that." I nodded, but something in me curled up small. Weeks passed. I worked extra shifts at the bakery below my room, saving up for application fees, second-choice schools, and maybe, just maybe, a visit back to Berkeley if I could swing the train fare. Alex and I studied less, talked more. We drifted from the science section to fiction shelves, sat outside in the tiny library courtyard reading side by side in the fading light. It was starting to feel like life again, like the start of something good. Then came the results. I checked the admissions portal on a rainy Tuesday, my hands shaking as I typed in my login. I held my breath as the page loaded, heart thudding like a warning drum. We regret to inform you. I stared at the words for a full minute numb. I refreshed the page. Nothing changed. It didn't make sense. My scores were strong. My essay at heart. I had done everything they asked and more, and still rejected. Berkeley had been the dream, the revenge, the proof. Now it was just a locked door. I closed my laptop and sat in silence, hearing the distant whir of the bakery mixer downstairs and the soft patter of rain against my window. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I put on my coat and walked to our cafe. It was the little place on the corner with the green and white awning and cracked mugs. We'd been going there on slow Sundays, splitting a muffin and arguing about which type of moss was best for carbon sequestration. I didn't text him, but he was already there. "Hey," Alex said gently as I slid into the booth. I must have looked like a ghost. He didn't ask, just pushed a cup of tea toward me and reached into his backpack. Out came a stack of used textbooks, thick scuffed covers, the corners curled from too many bags. Plant biochemistry, ecological systems, small-scale agriculture, and sustainability. "What's this?" I asked, my voice flat. He met my eyes, steady and calm. "If college won't take you, then we'll make our own classroom." I stared at him. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious," he said. "Jess, one rejection doesn't erase what you've built. You still want this, so let's keep going together." The words slipped past my defenses. I looked down at the stack of books. My fingers brushed the worn covers. Someone else had read these. Someone else had chased something with them, and now they were mine. "You brought all these for me." I borrowed them from a professor friend who owed me a favor. "They're a little out of date, but the science holds." For a second I couldn't breathe. Not because of disappointment this time, but because of something else entirely. Hope. "I don't deserve this," I whispered. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You deserve better than what they gave you, and I'm not they." That night, I returned to my room and stacked the textbooks on my desk. I opened the first one, Ecological Systems, and began to read. This wasn't how I imagined success. There was no letter in the mail, no cheering, no champagne. Just rain, rejection, and the boy who believed in me anyway. But something lit inside me that night, even stronger than before. If I couldn't follow their path, I'd build a new one they couldn't gatekeep. And I wouldn't be walking it alone anymore. The organic market on 10th and Maple wasn't glamorous, nothing in Modesto really was, but the moment I stepped inside, it felt like something clicked. The smell of soil and citrus. The rows of fresh herbs bundled with twine. The tiny "ask me about compost" button on the manager's apron. I didn't have retail experience, but I talked plants like other people talked sports, and the owner, Marcy, noticed that in our first 10 minutes. "So you actually like dirt?" she asked, one brow raised. "I study what lives in it," I replied, and just like that, I was hired for weekend shifts. At first, I stocked produce, organized the tiny greenhouse corner, and labeled jars of turmeric and hemp seeds. But it wasn't long before customers started lingering by the potted basil or the worm bin display, asking questions like, "Can I grow kale in a container?" Or "Why are my tomatoes turning black at the bottom?" And I'd answer. I'd pull a pad from my apron and sketch root structures, talk soil pH, suggest companion plants like marigolds for natural pest control. It was the stuff I'd been cramming into my brain for months, and now it was pouring out of me like it had always belonged. "You missed your calling as a garden whisperer," Marcy joked one afternoon, nudging me with a jar of local honey. "We should start calling you Jess the Plant Witch." I shrugged, but I couldn't stop smiling. After work, I'd come home with dirt under my fingernails and sore feet, but I felt full in a way that studying never quite gave me. Alex started dropping by in the evenings, sometimes with takeout, sometimes with coffee-stained notebooks full of lecture notes he'd copied just for me. "Today's topic," he'd say, "plant hormones and why auxins are cooler than people give them credit for." He'd clear a corner of my tiny desk, prop open a textbook, and launch into his best imitation of Professor Chan, complete with exaggerated hand gestures and obscure tangents about lichen and love. I'd laugh more than I learned some nights, but it didn't matter. We were carving something out slowly, steadily, not just knowledge but a space. A world where I wasn't the forgotten daughter or the rejected applicant. I was just Jess, and he was just Alex. And this was ours. Sometimes we'd end up on the fire escape, passing back a thermos of tea, watching the bakery lights flicker off one by one. You think it's weird I didn't apply to med school this year? He asked one night, his voice low. I turned to look at him. Why would it be? I don't know, he said with a shrug. Everyone else has their 5-year plan tattooed on their forehead. I've just been waiting. For what? For something that feels like more than survival, I guess. I leaned back against the railing, letting his words settle. I get that. He glanced sideways at me, eyes catching in the glow of the streetlight. It feels like we're building something, doesn't it? I didn't speak right away. But I nodded, because yes, it did. Not just a plan or a project. Something real, built from scratch. No shortcuts, no handouts. We didn't say anything else for a long time. Just sat there in the stillness, the quiet between two people who hadn't had much given to them, but who were slowly learning how to give something back to each other. It started with 2 dented tin tubs and a windowsill full of basil. Then came a row of salvaged milk crates I'd found behind the market, drilled for drainage and lined with thrifted burlap. I filled them with compost, planted spinach, kale, lavender, anything hardy enough to survive my learning curve. I called it my upstairs farm. Customers at the organic shop began asking about the tiny bundles of greens I brought in with handwritten tags, grown in reclaimed containers. No chemicals, no shortcuts. Some weeks I made $10. Some weeks I lost 20. But every night, long after the bakery closed and the city had gone quiet, I'd be hunched over my desk by the single lamp, scrawling crop schedules, checking soil moisture sensors I'd built with parts Alex helped me order online. I studied like I used to, only now it wasn't for grades. It was for growth. Alex watched it all unfold. He helped when he could, hauling soil, setting up a mini irrigation system, designing a humble website we called Jessica's Greens. The orders trickled in. A cafe down the block asked for weekly herb bundles. An elderly couple on Elm Street wanted salad kits delivered every Thursday. It wasn't glamorous or fast, but it felt honest. Still, the numbers didn't lie. Between packaging, soil amendments, and trial-and-error losses, I was barely breaking even. Some days I felt like I was growing failure in biodegradable pots. One evening, after a rough delivery where a crate of seedlings tipped over in the bakery stairwell, I sat on the floor of my room, hands covered in dirt and frustration clumping in my throat. This was stupid, I muttered. No one builds a business out of backyard parsley and hope. Alex was already crouched beside me. Hope is underrated. I shot him a look. You don't have to say stuff like that. I don't say things I don't mean. The silence stretched. He didn't push. He never did. Then he said, "Come to my parents' place tomorrow." I blinked. Why? They want to meet the girl I never shut up about. I stared. Alex, they also want to talk to you about your crop rotation chart. You told your parents about my rotation chart. They've been waiting for someone like you for years, he said with a smile. You just don't know it yet. The next evening, I nervously stepped into their modest home nestled in a cul-de-sac lined with almond trees. His mother, Ingrid, welcomed me with a hug that smelled like rosemary and warmth. His father, Samuel, shook my hand like I'd already made it. Dinner was simple roasted vegetables, fresh bread, chamomile tea, but the conversation filled every crack inside me that had been chipped away by doubt. We used to run a co-op garden before the droughts hit hard, Ingrid said. We've seen people start things and give up. Samuel nodded. But you've got vision and grit. We believe in people like you. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever used that word about me before. Believe. After dinner, Ingrid handed me a box of old gardening journals, margins full of handwritten notes, recipes, soil experiments. These are yours now, she said. Use what helps, change what doesn't, make it yours. Later, back on the fire escape with Alex, I stared out into the night, heart full in a way I hadn't expected. You okay? He asked. I nodded, still holding the journals close. For the first time in a long time, I think I might be. It didn't happen with a formal decision or moving boxes lined up at the door. It started with me staying over on nights when it rained too hard or when the bakery pipes made that screeching noise that always woke me at 3 a.m., then it turned into leaving an extra toothbrush. Then a drawer. Then my favorite mug. And one evening, I came home from work and saw my basil plant already perched in Alex's kitchen window, soil still damp from him watering it. I didn't ask if I lived there now. He didn't either. We both just knew. His apartment wasn't big, an upstairs corner unit with creaky floors and mismatched furniture, but it became our sanctuary. The smell of coffee in the mornings, his notes stuck to the fridge reminding me to eat, the way we traded book recommendations like secret messages. Our days fell into a rhythm I'd never known with anyone. I worked mornings at the store, handled my plant orders in the afternoons, and studied at night. Alex would come home from campus humming absent-mindedly and toss his backpack on the couch with a relieved sigh, as if the air inside these four walls let him finally breathe right. We cooked together, shared quiet dinners, sometimes falling asleep mid-conversation with the windows cracked open and the sound of wind through trees slipping in. It wasn't thrilling, it wasn't dramatic, but it was peaceful, and that was a kind of miracle. One night, as we lay in bed, my head on his chest and the scent of lavender drifting in from the balcony pots, I whispered, "I've never had this kind of peace before." He didn't say anything right away, just pulled me closer and kissed the top of my head like he'd heard every version of me that had never been safe enough to say that out loud. "I want to build something real," I said, more to myself than to him. "Not just a business, a life." "Well," he murmured, "we've got soil and sunlight, sounds like a good start." That week I took the biggest leap I'd made yet. A cafe owner who'd been buying my herb bundles told me about a shared greenhouse space available on the east side of town, a rundown but salvageable plot behind a community center that had been abandoned for years. Cheap rent, good light, big potential. It scared me. The commitment, the possibility that I could fail in public, not just on my fire escape with a handful of parsley and a hopeful heart. But Alex was already standing at the door with a tape measure and a grin when I went to look at it. He traced out raised bed designs in the dirt with his foot and said, "You could start with microgreens along this side. Maybe try companion beds, lavender and tomatoes." "I haven't even signed the lease yet," I laughed, but I felt the pull deep in my chest. That same night I did. And just like that, Jessica's Greens was no longer a quiet upstairs experiment. It had a sign, a patch of soil, a future. I posted my first official update online, launching something small with big roots. Jessica's Greens. I didn't expect anyone to notice, but comments started rolling in from customers, old classmates, neighbors. "Can't wait to visit. You're inspiring me to start my own backyard garden. Modesto needs more women-led businesses like this." I stared at the screen, overwhelmed, not by orders or likes, but by the simple truth of it all. They didn't see me as the girl who was passed over. They saw the woman I was becoming, and for once, I did too. The first signs came in the morning. I walked into the greenhouse and was hit by a wall of heat so thick it felt like breathing through wool. My plants, once vibrant and stretching toward the sun, now slumped under its weight. Leaves scorched, soil cracked, stems wilted like they'd been holding their breath too long. The forecast had warned us. "Unseasonably high temperatures," they said on the radio. "Hydrate, avoid prolonged sun exposure." But no one had told my spinach. By the end of that week, the damage was done. The lettuce bolted, shooting bitter stalks toward the ceiling. My basil, my failsafe crop, turned brittle overnight. Even the hardy greens, kale, chard, couldn't withstand the intensity. Every tray of seedlings I'd prepped for restaurant deliveries withered before I could load them into the crates. I sat on the greenhouse floor that Friday afternoon, arms wrapped around my knees, sweat dripping from my temple. Around me, the air buzzed with heat and silence. Jessica's Greens had survived slow sales, learning curves, and borrowed soil. But now it looked like it might not survive the sun. The financial dip came fast. Restaurants canceled orders. My regulars messaged apologetically, saying they'd skipped this week's produce bundles. Worse were the reviews. A few public comments on my online page called out inconsistent quality and wilted produce that didn't match earlier photos. I didn't blame them, but it felt like being punched in the stomach. The following Monday, I stared at the order board in the greenhouse, my to-do list untouched, and thought maybe this was a mistake. Maybe they were right to bet on Emily. Maybe I really am just someone who figures it out until she doesn't. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, cursor hovering over the temporarily close shop button on my website. Alex walked in and froze. "What's going on?" he asked. I tried to laugh. It came out wrong. "Just thinking it might be time to pause, regroup, or quit while I'm only a little bit humiliated." He didn't say anything, just walked over and quietly shut my laptop. "We're not quitting," he said. "I'm tired, Alex." "I know," he said softly, "but tired doesn't mean done." The next morning, I woke to the sound of a car pulling up outside the greenhouse. When I peeked out, Alex and his parents were unloading fans from the trunk, carrying buckets of water, bags of mulch, rolls of shade cloth, and even a borrowed industrial mister. "What are you doing?" I asked, half stunned, half embarrassed. Samuel handed me a pair of gloves. "We're saving what we can." Ingrid wrapped an arm around my shoulder. "You built something worth fighting for, Jess, so let's fight." That day, we worked like it was a second harvest. Alex rigged the fans to battery packs. Ingrid lined the crates with reflective foil she'd saved from an old camping set. Samuel layered mulch to preserve the moisture. I snipped away damage, started salvaging what I could. By sunset, the greenhouse looked patched and tired, but alive. I stood outside, dirt on my cheeks, throat tight. My crops weren't restored. My finances weren't fixed, but I wasn't alone, and that changed everything. Later, as we sat under the string lights Alex had hung last winter, I whispered to him, I came so close to giving up. He took my hand, squeezing gently. "You still might, someday, but not today." The future still looked uncertain. But I finally believed I could face it, with soil-stained hands, people who showed up, and maybe, just maybe, roots strong enough to weather even this. The greenhouse didn't bounce back overnight, but it breathed again. The emergency misting system Alex built with a salvaged hose and a borrowed timer gave the air a new rhythm. The salvaged kale and lavender, what little survived the heat wave, looked less defeated under the shade cloth. I started over in quiet waves. Fewer trays, slower cycles, more intention. Customers noticed. They began returning, not just for the produce, but for what I hadn't realized I was giving them all along: trust. They saw someone who didn't give up when her harvest did. They came for parsley, stayed to ask questions, and left with more than just groceries. That's when the idea hit me. One Sunday afternoon, I made a flyer: "Grow with Jessica's Greens. Intro to backyard gardening, no yard required." I posted it on the shop's bulletin board, then taped one to the bakery's window and left a stack with the cafe owner who'd never stopped ordering my lemon thyme. The next day, 5 people signed up. The day after that, 10 more. I started running workshops in the greenhouse, teaching people how to grow herbs on fire escapes, how to repurpose milk jugs into seedling trays, how to read a soil bag like a nutrition label. It wasn't just business. It was connection. People stayed after the classes, talking about food insecurity, city planning, school gardens. They asked about compost, pollinators, how to teach kids that carrots come from soil, not plastic bags. With the help of Alex's parents, I began assembling beginner kits. Starter herbs, biodegradable pots, handwritten instructions. We called them plant packs with purpose. The first batch sold out in 3 days. I wasn't just back on my feet, I was moving forward. Then came the email: Modesto Small Business Collective invites you to speak at our upcoming Green Innovation Seminar as a featured local entrepreneur. I read it 3 times, me, speaking to strangers. About success. Alex high-fived me so hard he knocked over a crate of microgreens. 2 weeks later, I stood behind a podium in a borrowed blazer, looking out at rows of local business owners, students, garden hobbyists. My palms were damp, but my voice, once I started, was steady. I didn't talk numbers or marketing. I talked about failure, about the heat wave, about rejections, about growing in milk crates when everyone else had garden beds. And I told them what changed everything wasn't strategy, it was support. "I didn't build this alone," I said at the end. "People believed in me before I believed in myself, and that's the kind of investment that never stops growing." The applause didn't roar, but it didn't need to. It felt real, like soil under fingernails, like water after drought. That night, Alex's family took me out for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sparkling lemonade at a family-run place where the candles melted too fast and no one rushed you to leave. Ingrid toasted me with a smile that reached her eyes. To the girl who grew her own table when she wasn't given a seat. I couldn't speak for a second. Then I looked at all of them, Alex, Ingrid, Samuel, and whispered, "You made me believe I could be more than just overlooked." They didn't interrupt, didn't brush it off or rush to comfort. They just let the moment sit, like roots settling deeper into good earth. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was proving anyone wrong. I was finally living like someone who knew she was right all along. It was a quiet Tuesday, overcast, peaceful. I just finished wrapping the last of the weekend's plant packs and was sipping lukewarm tea in the greenhouse when I felt it, a strange wave of dizziness, soft but insistent. I brushed it off at first. Too much sun, not enough sleep. Typical, but then it happened again. And again. 2 days later, I stood in the corner pharmacy's bathroom with a pregnancy test clutched in both hands like it was a flare I wasn't ready to fire. Minutes passed in a silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. Then 2 pink lines. I didn't move, didn't cry. Just stared at that tiny plastic strip as if it held a secret the whole world had already known. I didn't even grab a bag, I just ran. Through the afternoon streets, past the community garden, through puddles left from last night's rain. My hands shook the whole way, fingers still gripping the test like a lifeline. The sky had opened just a little, spilling golden light across the roofs as if it, too, wasn't sure what to make of this moment. When I reached Alex's building, I didn't knock. I burst in breathless, the door slamming behind me. He looked up from the kitchen, where he was chopping garlic, brow furrowing instantly. Jess. I opened my hand. For a second he didn't move, just blinked once. Then again. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides, wrapped his arms around me, lifted me clean off the ground, and laughed into my neck. "You're serious?" he whispered, voice cracking just enough to break me open. I nodded, finally exhaling. I didn't know who else to tell first. His forehead touched mine. "Then let's make this official." I froze. "Wait, what do you mean?" He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. "I mean let's be a family. Not just a greenhouse team or plant nerds in love. I want the whole thing, Jess. You, me, this baby, a home, roots, all of it." I burst into tears, half laughter, half relief, all love. We didn't want a big wedding. The courthouse was quiet, almost reverent. I wore a simple pale green dress. Alex wore his best shirt with the wrinkled collar. Ingrid tucked a tiny sprig of thyme into my braid, and Samuel wiped his eyes so many times I lost count. There were no flower girls, no guest list, but there was love. And afterward there was a house. We found it tucked on the outskirts of town, a single-story, sun-washed place with creaky floorboards, peeling shutters, and a backyard that stretched farther than anything I'd ever owned. It wasn't perfect, which made it exactly right. The garden was wild when we moved in, grass overgrown, vines tangled across the back fence, but when I stood in it, I saw Rose. I saw beds and trellises and children digging barefoot beside pea shoots. I saw a dream farm. Ours. "You know," Alex said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as we stood in that overgrown yard, "I think this soil's been waiting for you." I leaned back against him, hand on my belly. "I think we all have," I whispered. It happened on a late spring afternoon, the kind where the breeze carries the scent of fresh soil and everything feels quietly in bloom, even me. I was kneeling in the garden, tying tomato vines to twine, my belly just starting to round beneath my cotton dress, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A sleek silver SUV I knew all too well pulled into the driveway. I wiped my hands slowly and stood. The door opened, and out stepped Emily. She looked exactly the same and somehow completely unfamiliar. Designer sunglasses, manicured nails, the latest phone already in her hand. Her gaze swept over the garden beds, the hand-painted greenhouse sign, the porch swing with Alex's jacket tossed over it. Then her eyes landed on me. "Jessica," she blinked. "This is your house." I didn't say anything, just watched her process it. She turned slowly, mouth parting as she took in the warm, sunlit sprawl of the yard, the blooming rosemary bushes, the homemade trellis Alex and I had built last weekend. And then, like instinct, she pulled her phone up and whispered, "Dad, you have to see this right now." I almost laughed. 20 minutes later, their car pulled in. I could hear my mother before I saw her. "Well, it can't possibly be hers. Emily must have misunderstood." Then they rounded the path and froze. My father stopped walking like his body had short-circuited. My mother's eyes darted from the porch to the planters to the greenhouse and finally to me, belly visible, barefoot in my own backyard, holding a watering can like it was a crown. "This is yours." My mother asked, voice tight. Alex stepped outside just then, wiping his hands on a towel, and came to stand beside me. Without a word, he reached for my hand. I took it. "It's all hers," he said simply. My father swallowed hard, something shifting in his face I'd never seen before. He looked at the garden, then at my belly, then back at me. "We were wrong, Jess," he finally said, voice cracking. "We thought you'd never make it without us." I stepped forward, chin lifted, voice steady. "But I did," I said, "because I had people who chose me." No anger, no tears, just the truth, spoken like a seed finally cracking open after years in the dark. And for the first time in my life, it was their silence that said everything. The next time my parents visited, they brought lemon cake from a bakery in Sacramento and a dozen questions they didn't know how to ask. I didn't make it easy. They sat stiffly on the porch swing while I watered the garden, one eye on them, the other on the thriving row of peppers climbing the lattice like they'd never known hardship. Alex stayed close but quiet, just within earshot, just enough to steady me. It had only been a few weeks since their unannounced appearance, but something in their posture had softened. My father carried himself with a kind of hesitation I'd never seen in him before. My mother wore the same perfume I remembered from childhood, the one that clung to the coats I used to borrow when she wasn't looking. I thought we could help plant something, she offered, holding up a pair of brand new gloves still clipped together at the tag. I nodded once. There's a patch that needs weeding. They got to work. It was awkward, clumsy. My dad grunted more than he spoke, pulling up crabgrass like it was penance. My mom paused every few minutes to glance toward the window where Alex had just installed the baby's new crib. I could feel the questions hovering, heavy and unspoken, but I wasn't ready to hand them anything easy. Not yet. Still, I let them come back. Once a week at first, with pastries or seed packets or guilt wrapped in pleasantries. I kept boundaries. No conversations about the past unless I opened the door. No sudden opinions about how I ran my home, my business, or my life. But I did let them hold the ultrasound photo I kept tucked into a frame by the kitchen. I watched my father's hand tremble slightly as he traced the outline of a tiny foot. I saw my mother's eyes well up when she asked if we had a name picked out. We hadn't, not yet. They never said sorry in so many words. But sometimes, sorrow speaks quieter than apology. One Sunday, we had lunch under the shade of the apricot tree, the table set with fresh bread, herb butter, and the silence that always comes before something important. My mother reached across the table slowly and rested her hand over mine. I see now, she said quietly. Your strength wasn't the reason to abandon you, it should have been the reason to support you. I didn't pull away, but I didn't smile either. Instead, I looked at her, the woman who once told me, "You'll figure it out," like it was a compliment and a dismissal rolled into one. And I said, "You still have a lot to unlearn," she nodded. I want to, that was new, that mattered. Forgiveness didn't come fast for me. It was like the perennials in the greenhouse, slow to root, cautious to bloom, and only in the right season. But I let them hold the garden hose while I dug compost. I let them see the wall where Alex and I marked the baby's due date with a tiny sticker. I let them sit beside me in the evenings, not as advisors or redeemers, but as people who, maybe, were learning how to choose me for the first time. And for now, that was enough. The land is different now. What started as a backyard with overgrown weeds and salvaged pots has grown into rows of heirloom tomatoes, trellises bursting with sugar snap peas, and a greenhouse that hums with life year-round. We built a second hoop house last spring. The soil is rich, dark, full of memory. We call it Avery Roots Farm. Sometimes I still pause at the gate, hand resting on the post Alex built from reclaimed cedar, and just breathe it in: compost and sun, earth and history. I've learned to hear the garden speak, not in words but in signs. Resilient lettuce after a dry spell. A volunteer sunflower blooming near the edge of the path. Every October, we host a harvest festival. Kids run between the apple cider stand and the hay maze. Neighbors bring homemade jam and play acoustic sets near the wildflower beds. My parents are always the first to arrive, wearing their matching sun hats and greeting volunteers like old friends. They help run the scholarship booth. It started with one student. Her name was Rena. Her parents couldn't afford college applications, and she was working part-time at the very bakery I used to live above. I saw her scribbling plant terms on a receipt slip while taking out compost one morning, and I knew I recognized her. Now the Avery Roots Fund gives out 6 scholarships a year. Not for the top of the class or the most polished essays, but for the ones who have been told you'll figure it out, and still did. Emily comes, too. She teaches 3rd grade now and brings her twins, Lee and June, who always run straight for the Ladybug release station. She laughs more freely these days. We don't talk much about the past. We don't have to. Time doesn't erase everything, but it rewrites the edges, softens them. As the sun dips behind the greenhouse and the crowd starts to drift, I walk the rows with my daughter Ava. She's 5, wide-eyed and barefoot, with her father's quiet curiosity and my need to ask why. She stops beside the marigolds and crouches. "Mommy, how do they know how to come back every year?" I kneel beside her, brushing dirt from her knee. They don't, I say softly. But they try anyway, that's the miracle. She looks up at me, tilting her head. Like you did, I smile and tuck a loose curl behind her ear. Exactly like that. As we walk the field, her small hand in mine, I glance back at the farm, at the people it holds, the soil it's healed, the futures it's seeded. And I think to myself, sometimes justice doesn't roar, it grows. That was the end of my story. When my sister Emily called our father to come see my home without telling me, was she finally trying to give me credit? Or just still playing the same game? I still wonder about that choice. Did she do the right thing? Tell me in the comments. And if my journey meant something to you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. I've got more stories to share.